Good morning. Nice to see all your beautiful and handsome faces here on this delightful morning. So, my name is Rachel Heinbaugh, for those of you who I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet. And we are going through this series is called Family Circus. And when Tony first told me about it, I said, "Oh, are we talking about the church? Because it can be a bit of a circus sometimes, right?" But it's about families. And so if you look in your bulletin, I don't have one with me, but there are 3 questions listed on it. And we're going to come back to these questions throughout this morning. And I want those to be things that you take home with you and that you reflect on, but I want you to think of them from this perspective. First off, you. Do you have a belly button? Check. Don't check if your neighbor has one, just check if you have one. If you have one, it means you were born, right, at some point in your life. And that means that you are a child and you have been in relationship of some sorts with some type of family. May have been a dysfunctional family, may have been a wonderful family, may have been a family that wasn't your real family, any of that, but you still have come from some place. And so I want you to come at this from the perspective of me. Who am I in life, okay? Secondly, we're going to come at it from the standpoint of parents. If you are a parent, I am a parent of children who I birthed and children who I did not birth. If you are someone who mentors people, teaches people, you are in the action of mothering and fathering people. So I want you to have that viewpoint as well, how you parent. Thirdly, in our relationship to God, because as we respond to Him is then how we respond to others. Does that make sense? I also feel that it's important to start off and say this. I have 5 children in my house. I have a dog, a gecko, a frog, and a hamster in my house. I have 3 kids in public school, 2 kids who are homeschooled currently. And this is our life. But your life is uniquely your life. And what I experience and go through does not in any way, shape, or form make your life worse or better than mine. When I was a mom of 1 baby, I was utterly so much more overwhelmed than I am right now. I don't know how, it just is. But what you are going through is unique to you, and it is your story, and it is valid and is important. And no part of it should be discredited because you're like, well, I mean, crazy lady on stage has like a zoo at her house, and so she just gets things. I don't, okay? Literally this morning we had a child run off down the street because they were terrified. So we get insane, okay? We get crazy. So we're going to start, everyone's back home. Nobody freak out. We're good. Things happen, right? So Ecclesiastes 3 is what we're starting in, and this is what they're talking about upstairs with the kids. So if you have kids up there, grandkids, this will apply to them as well. And so in Ecclesiastes 3, you have Solomon, who is so wise, and he goes in and says, there's an opportune time to do things, a right time for everything on the earth, a right time for birth and another for death, a right time to plant and another to reap, a right time to kill and another to heal, a right time to destroy and another to construct, a right time to cry and another to laugh, a right time to lament and another to cheer, a right time to make love and another to abstain, a right time to embrace and another to part, a right time to search and another to count your losses, a right time to hold on and another to let go, a right time to rip out. I mean, he's really covering all the bases here, isn't he? And another to mend, a right time to shut up and another time to speak up, a right time to love and another to hate, a right time to wage war and another to make peace. But in the end, does any of it really make a difference? And it always makes me think of in Matthew when Jesus is talking and he's telling the people and he says, do not worry about tomorrow for what tomorrow will bring. Because I take care of, this is my paraphrase, the birds in the air and the flowers in the field, and you can entrust yourself to me. But I don't know if you're anything like me, because I always have that weird timing where I look out the window and a beautiful bird's flying by, and then it attacks a moth and it eats it, right? And you're in the middle of a storm and you see a bird's nest fall from the tree and you're like, okay, so you take care of things, but things die. Things are hurt. Things are broken. What? What does that mean? And this brings us to our first question that I want you to take home and reflect on. As you, in your parenting, in your relationship to God, is it fair or is it equal? When I only had 2 children and I would go to the store and buy something, I'd probably get 2 things because it's cheaper with just 2 children. And you want it to be, we think, fair, right? Now that I have 5 children, it's a whole lot more expensive. But we realized fairness gets split apart. You're doing this with this kid because that kid's a boy, because that kid's a girl, because that kid is white, because that kid is black, because that kid has a higher IQ than me, because that kid has more special needs than me, because that kid can run fast, because that kid runs slow. And we realized that our view of fairness was not fair. And so what we've taken to telling our kids is, we have one child who she loves to wear footy pajamas in the dead heat of summer, and she is sweating and is gross, but that she feels comfy and warm, so go for it. And we've told her, though, and all the other kids, when it comes up about fair and equal, if I was doing it this way in your version of fair, I would get footy pajamas for every single child in this house and make every single one of you wear them. That's equal, but that's not fair. Because it's not God's sense of justice and fairness. It's not what needs to happen for each individual child. I could flip it the other way and say majority rules, everybody has to wear shorts and tank tops, regardless if it's freezing cold outside and our heat's out or it's in the dead of the summer. This is just what has to happen, right? That's more equal. It's still not fair. Because it's not what every child needs. The me part of this. We all have wounds in our lives that we have been treated unfairly in. And it could be something so, silly as a child of not getting picked by a team for a team or whatever, but it cuts. Those wounds really get us. And then it can be things even more egregious and worse, that things were not fair. And some people, their entire existence just isn't fair, frankly. And we come at it from the me part, and then we kind of put that on our kids or the people we're mentoring or walking alongside, because we want to always keep the peace, and we don't want people to get upset, and we don't want anyone to put the blame on us as being unfair, how we thought and viewed those people as being unfair. Oh, I'm not like them. When really it's the Holy Spirit's way of saying, there's a wound here that we should probably look at. In our relationship with God, there are always things that we can look at and say, I don't think you did that fairly, God. Why are you dumping physical provision on this person, and then this person's not getting anything? And because God, in his infinite love and goodness and wisdom, loves each one of us where we are at. And so he knows that one person needs the abundance of all the material things that don't mean anything anyway to meet their needs, in order for them to feel safe, in order for their walls to come down, in order for him to meet them at that place. And then he's like, but this person is already knitted to my heart and they don't need all that nonsense, because he knows us. One of my kids is a lover at heart, and he loves so deeply, and he's touchy-feely. It's like his teacher at school is like, can he stop touching people? And I'm like, he can't. It's in his DNA. He's just touching all the time. He loves that way. Another kid loves because he wants to have quality time, right? Another child, I'll sit and listen to her ramble off the bus for almost an hour every single day, because that's just her love language. And then I have another child who any of that is way too threatening. So you merely have to coexist together until they feel safe enough. Doesn't look very fair. Why aren't you hugging him, loving on? Because he can't handle it. And a good, kind, loving parent does what their child needs. Fairness, what is fair and what is equal. And recognizing yourself when this week when things happen, whether it's somebody cuts you off while you're driving a car, whether something comes up on the news and you get bristly and sad, well, those people, I'm sorry. Is this rubbing a wound in us, maybe? One of the reasons we get so defensive and grabsy in our survival mode is because we're afraid of others taking from us. But then really it cuts to the core because maybe we weren't about equality to begin with. We were just selfish. And a lot of the stuff going on out in the world today is revealing a lot of those wounds. Nobody wanted it to be equal to begin with. They just wanted what they could have. And we have to be a people who are willing to sit in the heart of God and say, what are you trying to reveal in me? What are you trying to reveal in the church? What are you trying to reveal in our nation? Because we will not change unless if our wounds are revealed. Amen? So we're going to move on. I have a cold. Excuse me. 'Tis the season to get sick, right? So then we go on. And there's a story when you go into the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And for those of you who are kind of like, why do they tell different stories? Again, our kids, we explain it like this. 3 of them have a shared history, but they have different perspectives of that history. 2 of them have a shared history, different perspectives of that history. And we always say it's like if I'm driving a car, I'm in the front left-hand side, because we're in America. And then if a child's in the back right-hand rear, they're going to see something else out their window. Kid in the middle seat is going to see something totally different, right? We're all living the same experience. We're all seeing it a different way. Kid in the back seat maybe sees a car coming towards him and is scared to death. But the rest of us are fine because we didn't see that. All of our perspectives, we're living the same thing. It's just a different perspective, right? And so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these are followers of Jesus. They all lived the same thing. They all had different takeaways, different personalities, and all of this. And so in Matthew 21, what happens is Jesus has come into the city. This is getting ready for Passover week. This is before he's crucified, obviously. He's doing things, still kicking it. And he has been celebrated as the Messiah. People have waved palm branches in front of him and said, this is the king who's coming, and we're all happy, right? And they think this is a season for celebration. They think this is a season for us to step into what was rightfully ours. But what happens is that Jesus goes into the temple. And Jesus goes into the temple, and he looks and he sees that people are there who are selling things, which wasn't bad. People sold things because you needed things to be able to sacrifice. And if you're traveling 400 miles, you're not going to carry like a dead goat with you that whole way because it would smell, right? Because they're walking. This is thousands of years ago, no cars, yeah? So there's people selling things, and that's okay. But the problem is that over and over and over again, the Father's heart has said, be in step with the heart of the Father. Be attuned to the heartbeat of the Father, which is the point of Ecclesiastes, is he's saying, who cares what season it is? Are you in tune with wisdom? Where are you directed at in your wisdom? What is that source for you? Because we can construct and make it look how we want it to look. You know, I always laugh looking at family pictures because we have them done probably every year, 2 years, and I can tell you the horrible arguments we had right before those pictures. You know what I mean? And everyone on Facebook is like, you're so cute together. And we're like, oh yeah, we know. You know, like, I can look back and say what seasons of awfulness we were going through at that time. Because we think what we present is just as good as what's going on inside. So I'm going to look really fair, but inside I'm just doing it because I want to look good. I want to look like a parent who provides. I want to look like a good leader, but I'm not really doing it from pure motive. So Jesus goes into the temple, and what happens is, so he sees all these people selling stuff, which that's okay, that wasn't the problem. The problem is that because we have a God in his infinite love and graciousness that says, back then, there are only certain people who can be super close to God, which were the priests, right? The high priest, and then there was this rippling group of who was in and who was out. But God always made provision for the people on the very outside who had no right to it. People who were not of the same blood type, people who looked differently, people who were diseased, people who were labeled unclean. They were the ones who got to go in the outskirts of the temple area. And the problem is that these people had set up all their booths to sell things, not outside of the temple, but they took over the space where the people who had no access needed to be, preventing them from being near the heart of God. And Jesus is here and he walks in with a pain in his heart because he knows that he is going to die the next week. Just for this express purpose to make it so those people get to jump and bypass everyone else. And he said it over and over and over again. He's walking around touching the dirty people, touching the prostitutes, doing all this stuff. He's still being judged for it. And he keeps trying to express to them, it does not matter what fruit you think you have on the outside, it's what inside is important. And so he leaves and he's walking by and he sees a fig tree. We don't have fig trees here. But he sees this fig tree and he's like, I'm hungry. And people look at it and go, Jesus gets pissy when he's hungry. No, that's not what happens. He's walking by and he's like, can I say that word from the stage? We said it. It's already been said, and my shoes are coming off. Okay, so he's walking by and he says, I'm hungry. And so he goes to this tree because it's full of leaves. Picture today an apple tree here. We have apple trees around, yeah? Full of leaves. It's springtime. It's not meant to have apples yet. In the Gospel of Luke, Mark, one of them, it says it was not in season yet. So it has leaves on it. Looks like it has life. He walks up, but the problem is, it doesn't have the beginning signs of fruit on it. An apple tree would have what early in the season? Flowers. If an apple tree does not have flowers, it's not going to bear fruit. You got a problem with the apple tree. And so Jesus looks at this tree and he says, it's not bearing fruit. Zap. Cutting it down. Because God, in his infinite love and graciousness, says, when I see it and it does not have the capacity to bear fruit, I'm going to start off where it needs to be started from. When I was about 3 years old, my brother was born. John, my brother. My brother was born with a hole in his heart. This was back in the 80s. Their technology was way less advanced than it is now. Thankfully, we lived in Zimbabwe at the time, and some of the best pediatric heart surgeons were in South Africa. So hop, skip, and a jump, we're there, right? But they had to wait for his body to grow and get stronger back then in order to do a big invasive procedure. Yes? So he has a hole in his heart. He can't walk developmentally, right? He's not keeping up with his developmental milestones. His lips are bluish because he's not getting enough oxygen. Fingernails, toenails are bluish, right? Now, my parents, because they are kind, gracious, loving parents, did not say, you know, if we just put some pink chapstick on him, kind of put some nail polish on it, we can walk him around like he's doing things, make it look like he's doing good. Good, kind, gracious, loving parent says, I am willing to undergo the risk that you might actually die in order for you to have life. Hear me? It's our second question. What have I lost? What have I gained? As a people of God, sometimes we focus so much, and I don't know where we get this from, but we're like, just slap a smile on that face and we're a people of joy, right? No, there's so much grief that happens in life. We are a people of lament, and lament takes us from the grief that is self-deprecating and then elevates us to the grief that says, but I still entrust myself to you. Graham Cook says, every movement of God brings us to the foot of the cross because there are things in us that simply must be crucified. They simply must die. In my parenting, there are things that must die. As a spouse, there are things in me that just must die. In my political mindset, as a daughter, as a friend, my sexuality, all the different components that make up a person, my theology and my emotions and every single thing, there are parts of us that simply must die. And the beautiful thing about nature is that it just lives in this natural echoing back to God. Nature cannot help but just respond in the way that it was intended to. Now's the season for feeding, we feed. Now's the season for resting, we rest. Now's the season for this. And they go with the ebb and flow of life because that's what they were purposed for. That's what we were purposed for. We just get a choice in it. We have free will. And so every time the Holy Spirit says, hey, Rachel, this thing has to die in you. And I'm like, oh, no, don't take that from me. I am choosing to not respond. Every time I hold on to something in me that he is telling me to relinquish. And he never asks us to go further than what Jesus did. Never does. But what happens is when it comes to a human child and we're like, I get it, yes, go do the surgery. You're a kind, loving parent. You would be negligent if you did not go get that surgery for your child. But then when God's like, hey, you got a big hole in your heart and we really got to fix it because you're not thriving. And we're like, get your grubby hands out of my business, Jesus. Right? We don't like it. But because he is loving and kind and gracious, he will say, got a whole bunch of leaves, got a really nice trunk, you're not bearing fruit, and I've waited for them thousands and thousands of years. And I'm going to have to cut you down. Your roots are still there. How I purposed you is still there. But we're going to have to start over and fill in those gaps. Everything that you have gone through in life, you can look back at and say, what have I lost and what have I gained for yourself? The most horrific circumstances, you can still go back and say, what have I lost in this and what have I gained? And in doing so, we sit with the Father in his heart. Sometimes he's just hunkered down in spots of our pain, just waiting for us to return there. And we're so busy covering them up, burying those spots because we don't want them to be seen. And he's just there waiting patiently. With our children, the people we mentor, the people we lead, some of the best questions you can ask them. You know, when kids go through their weird friend things, and you're like, I called it from a mile away, she was weird. But instead of saying that, don't say that. Instead say, what do you think you've lost from this experience? What do you think you've gained from this experience? Help your children or those you're walking with to navigate grief. If you're not helping navigate their grief for them, then they're walking around feeling like there's no purpose or meaning. And we're those direct guides for them. There's things in our life, too, that we have to ask God and say, I honestly cannot see what I would have gained from this because I feel like what I lost was way too much. And those are the moments that we sit with him. Do you know what it says? It says that it pleased God to release Jesus into the suffering. in order for us to roll ourselves onto him, for us to learn this echoed response. It pleased him. And if that doesn't trouble you, it should. Because no part of your life will be left untouched. It's like in the Chronicles of Narnia where they're like, you're so safe. And he's like, I'm not safe. I'm good. I'm not safe. There are things in your life that are good, holy things. He still has rights to sift through those. Everybody got a pine cone? Yeah. So the beautiful thing is this. So Jesus does this whole thing with the tree, and his followers are always a bit like, so what now? Like, what was happening? Why is this important? And Jesus goes on to tell them, he says, you will be able to pray prayers bigger than this. You will be able to throw mountains into the sea. You will be able to do all these amazing things. And we split apart these passages, and we're like, I can pray big prayers. This is awesome, right? And his point is, it's like he set before them this tree without any fruit, with this ginormous tree that bore all the fruit in the world, himself. His point is, when you abide in the Father, your fruit will be unlimited. You're not walking around hanging like wax apples on yourself, like making yourself look good. You will actually not even have to speak about the fruit in your life because it will just be evident from how it falls off of you. That's his point of comparing in these stories. So much of our humanity is caught up in the cycle of control. Children, when they're growing up, for every moment that you love that they're a baby, you're always wanting the next stage. And then as soon as they get to the next stage, you're like, can you stop walking already? Can you stop talking? Can we just, there's always this, you're urging them on and pulling them back. It's this control thing that we have. Yeah? Probably a bunch of us have wounds in our own heart or things that maybe trigger us from our own growing up, right? So pine cones. Joe and I were out hiking a few weekends ago. We got to get away for about 4 days, which is like miraculous. Thank you for grandparents who are amazing. And who will put up with a circus for 4 days. And so we're out hiking in the middle of Nevada desert. And when you change the science terms are leaving my mind right now. As you're ascending, you're going higher into the cliffs and the canyons, you start becoming, you see it's green and there's life, right? It's not just desert. And so I picked up a pine cone, which I don't think you're supposed to take, but I did. And this one is like tightly closed up. And pine cones, when they're closed up, it's because they are retaining moisture. They're retaining nutrients. They are developing the seeds inside of them. And then when you see pine cones that are opened up, pine cones that are, splayed open, then it's because they've been in a dry, more arid environment for a while for those seeds to spread. Okay, pretty basic, right? Nature does what it is intended to do. There are some seasons that it is intended to stay shut up, hold in, enclosed, to maintain its nutrients, to absorb the water. There are some seasons where it is intended to open up for its seeds to fly. Now, out in California, out west, we have a whole bunch of wildfires going on right now, right? There are some pine cones, conifers, that will not reproduce unless they've gone through the heat of fire. They will not open up. They'll stay dormant for 50 years until they go through such excruciating heat that forces them to open. Now, my tendency as a parent, when I see my child going through something hard, A fire is I go and I dump water on it because I don't want them to go through a hard thing. Reflects my woundedness, not theirs, huh? And then I'm preventing them from opening up when it is their season to open. And then we're like, why has my child not been developing? Why is my grown-up child still living at home? Why is my, like, what is happening here? Have we been putting out too many of their fires for them? But is that also a reflection of maybe something you went through, not just them? And maybe God wants to meet you in that space. And maybe there's times where he asks for God to dump a whole lot of water on us to put out our fires, and he's like, I'm a good, loving God, and I know that you're going to bloom after this. You know, Yellowstone National Park, they have a big old fire about every 150 years, they realized. And only certain types of trees grow back after that fire. But once people started getting involved bulldozing out the fires, those areas wouldn't grow the trees anymore. Because we want to control and maintain how damaging things are. And it's a direct reflection of our trust in God, which he's not angry about. He's just saying, but I think we need to take care of this. Because he wants us to naturally roll into the seasons and roll out of them. He wants us to naturally to say, okay, now is a season of death in my life, and then get to the point when we see those things coming, when we see conviction coming, instead of us fighting it for like 12 years, we can then say, I'm running to the death because I know what life is coming after it. The third question is this a time for soaking or a time for spreading? In your own heart, I don't know about you, but as soon as Jesus like covers me up and says you need to soak, I'm like, but I'm ready, right? We don't like it. It makes us feel claustrophobic, often because we're left dealing with ourselves. And that silence can be deafening. And we're kind of forced into a position of sitting with him because we have not learned yet that he is good and kind and loving and gracious. And other people have not shown us that, and we're not sure what to expect. With our kids, the people we're mentoring, walking alongside, teaching, as someone who mentors people, like, there's nothing worse than when you're setting them free. Like, now you just have to go make some of your own choices based on everything you've learned, and you know they're going to make all the wrong choices, and people are going to think you told them to do all those things. And you're like, ugh. And then you have to check yourself, it's not about me, right? This is about them and them having a safe place to come back to and realign with. In school, even, for people who are teachers, to be able to see like students, okay, is this allow them that time to soak in, and other students, this is their time to spread their wings. And we're always going to have this give and take. And as long as we're trying to control it, we're going to think it's up to us. Now let me come and pry open your little pine cone things. Nope, I'm going to force them up. And it always feels disjointed and unnatural because it is. Because if we can live in a place of rootedness in God, if we can live in a place of just releasing to him in this trust, waiting on his timing, waiting on his seasons, he naturally unfolds it after it has reached its saturation point. He's the only one who has to pour into it. We don't have to. And then when fires come, because fires always come, you don't have to start questioning the me part. What about this was my fault? Was I not a good enough mom? Did I not love them enough? Did I not teach them hard enough? Maybe none of it has anything to do with you stop being selfish. Maybe this has everything to do with them and their life and their growth. And then with our relationship with God, we will spend far more of our time with him closed up and soaking than we ever will out spreading. And every time that we try and construct something to look different than what it actually is, because God is good and holy and he does not change in his character, he calls our bluff because he loves us. Because he says, I have to go back and fill in that part before I can get to the next part. Right? It's hard. But we can do hard things because that's what we were made for. We're made to take on giants. We're made to slay the invincible. We are made. This is the thing that's different than the Old Testament, is because then we have the Holy Spirit inside of us. This is why Jesus is heartbroken, because he's like, a week from now, you have the access to everything at your fingertips inside of you. This isn't in the thing, but write it in. Just draw a line, straight line, horizontal line. At some point this week, when you have time, look at your timeline of your life. I did this with one of my kids this past week, and looking at it, whether you do your starting point at when you were birthed, when you do your starting point before that, wherever you tend to do your starting point from, look at it and write all the things that have happened to you along the way, the big things, right? And often what we see is I was born and then all kinds of crap happened. Good things too. But it's still an egocentric point of view. It still started with me. So it's always how people reacted to me or my reactions to other people. And then if you can extend onto the beginning of that, before you, there was God. And God thought about you. And God, in that moment, could see you in this moment and say, it was still important for you to be here. And if God is the starting point of our life, then that is what we realign to. When he chops down the tree, he's not taking out the roots, because the roots were there long before we existed. He wants to realign us to that, to say, but what were you originally intended for? What was your purpose? Who are you made to be? Sometimes we don't like that because we'd rather just carry all the blame ourselves. But he's good, and he's loving, and he wants more for us than that. And he wants us to start at him as our starting point, not us, and with our kids and those we walk alongside, right? God, we thank you for your goodness and your beauty. We thank you for the way that you love us deeply, and the way that you just, you are good. May we see you in your place of safety, so we come and approach you. Pour your peace, God. Pour your peace.